My interaction with Georgia's elected officials, I could tell that there was legislative support for a medicinal marijuana program in the state, but I didn't really understand the urgency until I met some of the families fighting for access to cannabis oil. In July, I was introduced to Sebastian and Annette Cott, who want the option to treat their son Jagger with cannabis oil in Georgia. Jagger suffers from a rare terminal form of mitochondrial disease called Leigh's disease. On top of all the seizures, this genetic disorder affects his heart and his digestive and respiratory systems because his body doesn't produce enough energy for the functions you and I take for granted.
We handle over 100 syringes a day. And we calculate if we do that 300 times a year, because we're in the hospital about 50 days a year, we handle over 30,000 syringes a year. This is methadone, so it's not a drug you should be on for a very long time. But we're using this for his pain control.
And the methadone treatment can also cause him to get hooked on it for his body.
Oh, he's absolutely hooked on it. I mean, he's hooked on Valium, he's hooked on methadone without a doubt. And he's been on it for so long, it's in his body, so he needs it just to function every day. Some days he sleeps 20, 22 hours a day, and we can wake him up.
That monitors his oxygen levels in his blood and his heart rate. 100 is the maximum, and anything below 90 gets critical.
That's his BiPAP machine. He has to have this mask on every night to sleep. He has to get breathing treatment 3 times a day. But after that, we put him on a machine called the vest, which is this machine right here.
If we don't do any of this, his breath will become very shallow, his oxygen levels will go down, and we will be in the hospital with pneumonia.
So, I mean, just between the treatment and the meds, you're looking at a full-time job right there, because he can't live without it. So can you imagine trying to move to Colorado or to any other state?
That day when they didn't pass it showed me that they did not understand. They were willing to gamble with our lives and our emotions and our children's lives. The ones that ultimately had the power, they didn't care.
At this point, Annette and Sebastian were considering their options. The trip to Colorado would not just be difficult, it could be life-threatening for Jagger. The equipment he needs to survive isn't allowed on a commercial flight, and some of it's owned by the hospital, which means they wouldn't be able to carry it with them out of the state. There's also the possibility that they could arrive in Denver and not find the same relief that other patients experience. I wondered what choice I would make in that situation. The preparations for a trip like that seemed endless. It didn't take long to wonder, why should anyone have to make that choice at all? Jagger's condition requires him to take many dangerous seizure suppressants called benzodiazepines, which are addictive and extremely intoxicating, and he's often prescribed opiates for pain. One reason the Cotts are seeking cannabis oil is for the pain relief that THC could provide without the side effects of the harsh pharmaceuticals. Since THC is the ingredient that can be considered intoxicating, the exact level allowed in the medication in Georgia is controversial. But the truth is, it's much more complicated than 1 or 2 particular compounds that may intoxicate a patient. THC is the property that may get a marijuana user high, but it's one of several hundred puzzle pieces found in the cannabis plant that make the treatment effective. Some patients respond well to low THC strands. Others require slightly higher levels of THC. In Colorado, those ratios are not restricted, and that made the difference when they decided to join another family who had made the journey.
Haleigh's 4. She started having seizures at about 8 months old. So she was diagnosed with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is just intractable seizures that can't be controlled with medication. On January 10th was Haleigh's turning point. I had Haleigh on the vest and doing a breathing treatment while I was getting her ready for bed. And when I came back to her, she was in her chair and she was blue. She wasn't breathing at all. So she was just lifeless. Her pulse was beating as fast as it could, and I knew her heart was fixing to give out. And at that moment, I figured my child's going to die, and all because of epilepsy. It was just the start of our nightmare. We stayed in the PICU for 2.5 months, and Haleigh continued to quit breathing. Doctors were giving us, maybe 6 months more to live, and her seizures were just getting worse and worse. They had pretty much told us there was nothing else they could do. They sent us home, they discharged us from the hospital when she was still continuing to quit breathing. So when I got home, I was still having to do CPR on my child to make sure that she continued to keep breathing. Nothing worked, so to come here and be on a natural plant that is actually changing her life for the better, it's amazing. We were very cautious when we moved out here, but we had to try it. And when we first moved here for the CBD, we were not as hopeful as so many families because we've been on everything that they said was supposed to work and nothing's ever worked. Getting Haleigh on a plane was extremely hard because she really wasn't stable, but we had no other way of getting her to Colorado safely. So we were able to get on the plane. She would quit breathing, so we would have to figure out a way to get her started back again, and then she would just seize constantly. I think she had about 300 seizures plus on the plane. So it was extremely emotional. My husband drove. He packed up our house and we put it all in the back of the car and he drove over here. We had about a week with him while we were here, and then he had to leave, and we had no clue the next time we were going to see him again. Being so far away from each other is horrible. It's horrible. I don't want any other families to have to feel that pain. Before we started the medicine, Haleigh was having 200 plus seizures a day. She was maxed out on 4 different seizure medications, so she was extremely shut down. She pretty much would just lay there. She wouldn't move, she wouldn't talk, she wouldn't even make eye contact. She never smiled. After about the second dose, her seizures were cut dramatically, and we were only seeing maybe 50 a day. And all of a sudden, my husband was holding her at one point, and she just looked up and she just smiled. And it wasn't one of those seizure smiles that she usually has. It was a real smile that she was happy, and she was happy where she was. I would love for it to be decriminalized because that would bring me back home to my family, my friends. But if I would have stayed in Georgia, my child probably would have been dead. I can honestly say that Haleigh's hope and the Flowering Hope Foundation saved my child's life. That is a fact. It never would have happened without it.